or together in dual pack.
Thanks for the high sign.
Channel 4, your election station.
This is Vice President George Bush. Please stand by for an important message from President Reagan from the Oval Office in the White House.
My fellow citizens, the final hours of the campaign are upon us, and tomorrow America's future will be in your hands. I urge all of you, please take time to vote. You are the guardians of this great democracy. Tonight, I want to share with you my views about the issues that directly concern our future, the future of our children, and the future of this dream we call America. This election offers us the clearest choice in many years. Whether we go forward together with courage, confidence, and common sense, making America strong again, or turn back to policies that weakened our economy, diminished our leadership in the world, and reversed America's long-revered tradition of progress. 4 years ago tonight, I asked you to join us in a great national effort to free America from leadership that said we suffered from a malaise, that told us we must learn to live with less, and that our children could no longer dream as we once had dreamed. And yes, that inflation, taxes, no growth at home, and the steady loss of freedom and respect for America abroad were all beyond our control. I told you what I'd believed all my life. The greatness of America doesn't begin in Washington. It begins with each of you, in the mighty spirit of free people under God, in the bedrock values you live by each day in your families, neighborhoods, and workplaces. Each of you is an individual worthy of respect, unique and important to the success of America. And only by trusting you, giving you opportunities to climb high and reach for the stars, can we preserve the golden dream of America as the champion of peace and freedom among the nations of the world. Beginning the era of national renewal we promised on Inauguration Day hasn't always been easy. The professional politicians of Washington are set in their ways. As you worked harder to keep up with inflation, they had raised your taxes. When our industry staggered, they piled on more regulations. When educational quality slumped, they piled on more bureaucratic controls. They watched crime terrorize our citizens and responded with more lenient judges, sentencing, and parole. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, they punished our farmers with a grain embargo and neglected to rebuild our defenses. Those who spent a career doing these things made one thing plain. They didn't care how the American people had voted. They ridiculed our new ideas. House Speaker Tip O'Neill even warned us that things might not move as fast as we think they should because, quote, you're in the big leagues now, unquote. But then we did something that shocked the old guard here in Washington. We took our case to you, the people, and you gave us your support. You told those quote, unquote, big leaguers how double-digit inflation, high taxes, and outrageous interest rates had made it so difficult to buy homes, raise children, live on pensions, start businesses, or even find jobs. You said that our defenses had become dangerously weak, and you felt less secure. You made democracy work by sending one message to Washington loud and clear. And the message was, we want a change, and we want it now. You got their attention. Together we took command of a rudderless ship adrift in a sea of confusion. We reduced the growth of spending from 17% to 6%, reduced regulations and paperwork, cut your income taxes by 25%, and indexed the rates so government can't profit by driving you into higher tax brackets when you get a cost of living pay raise. We provided incentives to modernize older industries and start up new ones, reduced estate taxes for family farms and small businesses, reduced the marriage tax penalty, and increased the child care credit, the rate of return for small savers, and incentives for IRAs and Keogh contributions. We began to rebuild our defenses, which strengthened our alliances. We still have much to do to make our families more secure, to help many of you on our farms and in our inner cities or working in older industries not yet back on their feet. There'll be no final victory until we meet those challenges, until every American who wants a job can find a job, so that all of us are going forward together. But we can and will, because one fact is not debatable. America has made an amazing comeback. 4 years ago, inflation, taxes, interest rates, and crime were all going up. Tonight, they're coming down. Confidence, jobs, investment, growth, and achievement in our schools were all going down. Now, they're going up. The United States economy was dragging the world into recession. America was falling back. The Soviets were advancing, and all of that made peace less secure. Well, tonight, our expansion is leading the world into recovery. Our alliances are stronger. We're deterring aggression. The Soviets are no longer advancing, and all of that makes peace more secure. As President Eisenhower once said, everything is booming but the guns. On election eve 4 years ago, I mentioned those who said America was in her fading years, that she had no more heroes. And I noted the news coverage about the death of my friend John Wayne. One headline read, "The Last American Hero." I said then that no one would be angrier than Duke Wayne at the suggestion that he was America's last hero. Just before he died, he said in his unforgettable way, "Just give the American people a good cause, and there's nothing they can't lick." And you've proven he was right. If anyone is looking for heroes, let them look at Main Street America. All of you who during these past 4 years proved that the big leagues aren't with the Washington establishment. The big leagues are out in the heartland with you. Small businessmen and women, teachers, farmers, ranchers, blue-collar workers, homemakers, and high-tech entrepreneurs. You brought America back, and you're making us great again. All we did was get government out of your way. But our opponents have a very different vision for your future. Where we look at a problem and see opportunity, they look at opportunity and see a problem. We believe in knowing when opportunity knocks. They seem determined to knock opportunity. We work to increase your take-home pay. They're working overtime to tax it away. Despite their good intentions, I don't believe they place enough faith in people. Rather than encourage you to dream great dreams and provide opportunities to help America grow, they keep trying to make government grow. They do everything they can to save us from prosperity. And they keep right on giving us the same medicine that made us sick in the first place. They fought the idea of giving you a tax cut. If they'd had their way, average families would be paying over $900 more in taxes today. They've tried to repeal indexing, which protects working people from higher tax brackets. Indexing doesn't help the rich. They're already in the high brackets. Well, we stopped them. But they kept predicting disaster. They said our tax reduction would be, quote, murderously inflationary. That was just before inflation was reduced from 12.4 to around 4%. They said there would be no recovery just before recovery took off. Then they said it couldn't last. And now we have the best economic expansion in 30 years. Their team has a plan that will raise taxes the equivalent of more than $150 per household every single month. They have a knee-jerk addiction to tax increases. And every time they're knee-jerks, we get kicked. What has happened to the Democratic Party's concern for protecting the earnings of working people and promoting economic growth? Unlike today's Democratic leadership, President John F. Kennedy's program cut personal income taxes by 22%, just about what ours did. Then he coupled that with new incentives for industry, which led to a surge in investment, productivity, jobs, real wages, and economic growth. Sounds like what's going on today, doesn't it? Well, sadly, our opponent's team is not in the tradition of President Kennedy and his predecessors, Truman, Roosevelt. Their policies never sent out an SOS. They proudly proclaimed USA. Tomorrow, we can vote to go forward with an America of momentum or back to an America of malaise. Go forward with an economy that's robust or back to an economy that went bust. Go forward with morale up, jobs up, and inflation and taxes down. Or back to seeing things the other way around. Why raise our taxes when we can raise our sights? Why accept policies that ration our strength when we can vote for policies that build our strength? Let's walk together on the new path of hope and opportunity and work in a new spirit of patriotism to improve our neighborhoods and communities and build a better America. If the dream of America is to be preserved, we must not waste the genius of one mind, the strength of one body, or the spirit of one soul. Let us encourage all Americans, men and women, young and old, individuals of every race, creed, and color, to succeed and to be healthy, happy, and whole. Our goal is a society of unlimited opportunity, which will reach out to lift the weak and nurture those who are less fortunate. And in spite of what you've heard in this campaign, we are giving more help to more people who need our help than ever in our history. But the vision we outlined in 1980 does not come to an end simply because 4 years have passed. Our work is not finished. We must continue, not only into the next 4 years, but into the next decade and beyond, to meet our goal of sustained economic growth without inflation, a strong country prepared for peace. We need your support for 2 long overdue reforms resisted by the House leadership: a constitutional amendment to balance our budget and a line item veto giving a president authority to veto individual pork barrel items within appropriations bills. 43 state governors today have such authority. The President of the United States does not. Lowering everybody's personal tax rates helped create the strongest economic expansion in 30 years. We shouldn't stop there. We can simplify our tax system, bring your tax rates down further, and keep the United States the undisputed leader for jobs, innovation, growth, and a better life for years to come. A strong America will continue to push back frontiers of science and space and discover wonders of the unknown and achieve breakthroughs in medicine, technology, and communication that will enable the world to make great new leaps in human progress. We're going to maintain our leadership in space, go forward with our space shuttle program, and meet our challenge of building a permanently manned space station within a decade. We lead the world in advanced technology. We can use our knowledge and economic power to modernize our older industries. If we give our workers the tools they need, they can outproduce, outcompete, and outsell anybody, anytime, anywhere in the world. Going forward together also means rebuilding the most distressed areas of our country. And that begins with getting your help to force that stubborn leadership in the House of Representatives to free our enterprise zone legislation it's had bottled up in committee for 3 years now. Then they should pass our youth opportunity wage to help teenagers learn skills and start climbing the economic ladder. We'll keep moving forward with our grassroots drive to restore in our schools needed discipline, emphasis on basics, merit pay for teachers, greater involvement by parents, and standards of excellence that again seek the best for America. Young Americans are trying harder, and test scores show they're doing better for the first time in 20 years. Their improvement should give us confidence America will become more productive and competitive in this fast-changing world. Our crackdown on crime, thanks to energetic support from citizens groups and local law enforcement agencies, has produced the sharpest drop ever in the history of the crime index. We intend to keep cracking down until your families and friends can walk your streets again without fear. And let's make a national commitment to save our children from the drug abuse that poisons their minds and bodies. We have always followed 2 tracks in our defense and national security policies. One is to reverse the decline in our military defenses and restore respect for America. The other, equally important, is to search for peace through the negotiation of real arms reductions. We're proud to say that in the past 4 years, not 1 inch of soil has been lost to communist aggression. By rebuilding our strength and making ourselves reliable again, we can keep this nation strong enough to protect freedom and peace for us, for our children, and our children's children. And one day, all nations can begin to reduce nuclear weapons and ultimately banish them from the face of the earth. This is our plan for the future. If you believe that America has made a new beginning, that we're moving forward again, but could move much faster and farther by ending the obstruction in that Congress, will you support us by sending us a Congress we can work with? One that believes in the same principles you do. A Congress that won't increase your taxes and spend our revenues uncontrollably. We can strengthen our economy, our security, and the values that bind us. We can build an America even greater in science, literature, and the arts, and improve the quality of life for all our people. We can keep faith with the God who has made and blessed us as no other people have ever been blessed. This is the world that can be for each child born November 6th, 1984. A world at peace and alive with freedom. A society of growth, opportunity, and progress. In speaking tonight of America's traditional values and philosophy of government, we must remember the most distinctive mark of all in the American experience. To a tired and disillusioned world, we've always been a new world. And yes, a shining city on a hill where all things are possible. Our alliances, the strength of our democratic system, the resolve of free people, all are beginning to hold sway in the world. We've helped nourish an enthusiasm that grows each day, a burning spirit that will not be denied. Mankind was born to be free. The tide of the future is a freedom tide. This, then, is our historic task. It always has been, to present to the world an America that is not just strong and secure, but an America that has a cause and a vision of a future where all peoples can experience the warmth and hope of individual liberty. Today, America travels again the road of increased self-government and personal freedom. What a change from only those few years ago when patriotism seemed out of style. I'm not sure anyone really knows when this new patriotism began or how it grew so quickly. Was it seed first planted that day our POWs, who had braved a horrendous captivity in North Vietnam, came home and said, "God bless America," and then actually thanked us for what we had done for them? Or maybe it was that unforgettable moment when, after 444 days of captivity, our hostages came home from Iran to breathe American freedom again. We've known great joy as when we welcomed back our soldiers and those students from Grenada, but also enduring grief from the loss of brave men on the Grenada rescue mission and on our peacekeeping mission in Beirut. Each gave his life for a noble cause. Each must be remembered and honored forever. I treasure a memory of a visit to Normandy where I met the boys of Pointe du Hoc. And later at Omaha Beach, I read from the letter of a loving daughter who had promised her father, a Normandy veteran, that someday she would go back there for him. She would see the beaches and visit the monuments and place flowers at the graves of his fallen comrades. "I'll never forget what you went through," she wrote, "and Dad, I'll always be proud." We should pray that as much as we honor those who died to make us free, we also fervently pray such sacrifice will never again be required, that there will be a day when new battlefields are never again created. This and every election is what they sacrificed for. They gave everything to preserve and protect the vote you are free to exercise tomorrow. Regardless of how you choose, you must take the time to make that choice. I'm profoundly thankful to all of you for giving me the privilege of serving you these last 4 years. I ask for your vote again for one purpose only: to complete the task we began together 4 years ago. Along with George Bush, the strongest and finest vice president in my memory, I've traveled all across our country this year. We've both seen our young people, your sons and daughters and grandchildren, tens of thousands of them. We've met them on college and university campuses, and younger ones in schoolrooms and playgrounds. For me, a vivid recollection of them will be from a whistle-stop train tour through Ohio in that historic car that once carried Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and Dwight Eisenhower across America. America had a smile in her heart that day. At each stop and through each community, whether gathered on their sidewalks, back lawns, or the plowed fields of their farms, again and again, it was the young people I remembered. Cub Scouts in blue shirts and bright yellow kerchiefs, high school bands, college crowds, and little girls perched atop their dad's shoulders. Well, they and millions more like them are what this election is all about. Watching the Olympic Games last summer, Nancy and I were thrilled, as I'm sure you were, when we heard those repeated chants of USA, USA. Did it occur to you, as it did to us, that while each of those words, United States of America, is important, none is more so than the first? Yes, we are united. That is our rich heritage. There were moments in recent years when we wondered if we were still united, but not today. Crisscrossing this land these last few months, I have seen such proof of national unity. I know our children will inherit an America that's united and coming together again. There's more than the freshness of youth on those faces I've seen. There is the future and hope of all America. Tomorrow is theirs, a time when they can fly as high as their talents will take them. It's up to us to pass on to them a nation that's free in a world at peace. If you honor George and me once again with your vote, we will do everything in our power to be worthy of it. America is coming together again. We're building together. But what I'm really thankful for is that all across this shining land, we're hoping together. We can say to the world and pledge to our children, America's best days lie ahead. And you ain't seen nothing yet. Thank you. Good night, and God bless you.
On a Friday, just a few weeks ago, the barber shop closed 3 hours early. The mill shut its doors at noon. And all across the state, people were taking time out for something special. A train carrying the 40th President of the United States and bringing with it a new spirit of accomplishment and optimism and pride. Because in the past 3.5 years, things have been looking up in the country. Today, the economy is up. Taxes and inflation are down. Americans are working again. And so is America. So, while some folks might have come so they could tell their grandchildren they saw President Reagan, most of them just stopped by to say thanks. President Reagan, leadership that's working.
I'm Tom Brokaw at NBC News Election Headquarters. Who will be the next president of the United States?
I'm Roger Mudd. Will the Republicans hold the Senate? What will be the outcome in the House?
I'm John Chancellor. What will the election results mean to you, your family, and your future?
If you want election coverage that goes beyond the vote count, turn to NBC News.
Hello, I'm Dan Miller. Tuesday is Election Day, and Tennessee will help elect a president as well as a new U.S. Senator. Tennessee and Kentucky voters will choose local officials and make decisions that will affect all of our lives. To learn who wins and who loses, join me and the Channel 4 election team beginning at 6, Tuesday, election night.
From Channel 4, this is a news update with Dan Miller.
Good evening. If the weather holds out, a record 1.8 million voters may turn out in Tennessee for tomorrow's general election. That would be 200,000 more votes than those cast in 1980 when President Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter. Meanwhile, Walter Mondale and Ronald Reagan are wrapping up their campaigns tonight. Reagan is asking for another 4 years to finish what he's begun. Mondale is appealing for the biggest upset ever. Now this message.
Call Mount Juliet Heating and Air, your qualified York gas contractor, and get special 5-year financing with low monthly payments on a high-efficiency heat pipe gas furnace. Call Mount Juliet Heating and Air now.
We have 49 degrees in Nashville. More news later on the Scene at 10.
This has been a news update brought to you by your York dealer.
Your children well.
I want to be a baseball player. I want to be a fireman so I can save people and put out fires. I want to be a teacher.
I want to live a decent life. I don't want to live in poverty.
I want to be a dietitian.
I get $35 in food stamps, but I used to get 76, so they cut me right in half there.
I want to be a veterinarian because I like to help animals.
Well, I worked all my life, and it paid in. Then when I need it, it's not there.
I'd rather be the underdog in a campaign about decency than to be ahead in a campaign only about self-interest.
In the steel industry, in the industrial area in the United States, we're hurting. We've lost jobs. We've lost communities.
This has been a tough year for me, the toughest I believe I ever spent. And I don't care who knows it, I'll tell it like it is, because it's just the way it's been.
We've got a lot more working people in this country than you do millionaires or billionaires. And I think the Democratic Party and Mr. Mondale is a lot more concerned about these type of people, the working people.
If Mondale does what he said he'd do for the farmer and small businessman, we need him bad.
This is a fight about whether America is really back or can we do better.
The government of the United States is not up for sale. It belongs to the people of this country, and we want it back.
And we can take it back if we fight to protect personal and religious freedom.
This election is about Jerry Falwell picking justices to the Supreme Court.
It's about a plan for steady economic growth, future jobs, and taxes that are fair.
I will leave middle and moderate income Americans alone. They've paid enough, and I'm going to ask the wealthy and the big corporations and the loophole users to join the rest of us.
And it's about arms control in the nuclear age. About a president who has ignored the most awesome issue of our time, building more weapons, and now planning to escalate the arms race into the heavens.
Man may no longer pretend that the quest for disarmament is a sign of weakness. For in a spiraling arms race, a nation's security may be shrinking, even as its arms increase.
Here's the future, and you alone in the voting booth with your conscience will leave them a legacy. Make it one of economic opportunity for all, of a Supreme Court free to judge for liberty, of an end to the arms race at last. The face of the future is in your hands.
I want your generation and all generations in American history to get the very best. I want you to learn. I want you to challenge yourself. I want you to stretch that mind. I want you to think of new things and dream of new dreams. I want your life to be thrilling, and I want to help you.
Mondale and the vice presidential candidate Geraldine Ferraro.
This election is not only about opening doors of opportunity. This election is about the future.
Some say you can't win the presidency on the values of decency, fairness, and economic opportunity. But if one of us can't win on those values, then none of us can. For those values are America. Tuesday, your vote does matter for all of us. Do what's right. Mondale Ferraro, they're fighting for our future.
This is the NBC television network.
I don't pretend to have all the answers to all the complex problems that face our nation. But I do believe that many solutions can be found if we'll just work together. If we use our common sense, we can balance the federal budget and get these interest rates down. If we use our common sense, we can protect Social Security and reduce the threat of nuclear war. And if we'll just use our common sense, we can put America back to work.
Special schools for advanced students this week on Channel 4 News.
For most of you watching tonight, this will be the first time you will hear the truth about what Soviet fellow travelers in the United States call Star Wars. You will also learn some other somewhat shocking things. Why, for instance, is Vestia, the official government daily newspaper of the Soviet Union, endorsed Walter F. Mondale for president on February 12th, and why the Soviet government has been working ever since to get Mondale elected president. Why the Soviet press has repeatedly demanded that Henry A. Kissinger be reappointed Secretary of State, and why the same Soviet newspaper, Izvestia, violently denounced independent Democratic candidate Lyndon LaRouche on November 15, 1983. Ever since March 23, 1983, when the president went on television to announce a new defense doctrine for the United States, every major Soviet newspaper has denounced Lyndon LaRouche by name. Why does the Soviet Union support Walter F. Mondale and fear Lyndon LaRouche? Tonight, you'll learn why.
I am in full support of the Strategic Defense Initiative of President Reagan. I agree fully with the description of that policy as given by Secretary Weinberger, by Lieutenant General Abramson, and by Livermore Laboratories' Dr. Lowell Wood. My only disagreements with the President in this connection are two. First, I insist that the President should have devoted much of his election campaign to explaining this doctrine to our citizens, as President Franklin Roosevelt would have done. Second, the President should have campaigned personally to mobilize the majority of citizens to support an Apollo Project-style crash program to put a strategic ballistic missile defense in place before the year 1988. Except for these two criticisms, I give my full support to the program as Secretary Weinberger has described it. If you knew the facts, you would not only support that program, you would demand that we launch an Apollo-style program to deploy a first generation of such defense system before the year 1988. Tonight, I shall present to you as many of those facts as we can squeeze into a half-hour television broadcast. First, I should explain to you briefly why the Soviet government has been attacking me so violently by name during the past 18 months. The Soviets have been attacking me in print and running some very nasty KGB operations against me and my friends since about February 1972. But throughout the entire period, from February 1972 until April 1983, there was no Soviet attack on me to compare with the wild personal attacks launched against me from Moscow since the President's televised address of March 23rd last year. The Soviet government blames me for the Reagan administration's adoption of what Mondale called the Star Wars policy. Obviously, the Soviet government exaggerates my influence. They base their hatred of me on the fact that I was the first to propose a ballistic missile defense policy of the type now known as Star Wars at a Washington, D.C. seminar of February 1982. Since that conference, my associates and I conducted an international campaign in the United States and among our allies to mobilize support for the adoption of this policy. It has been my activities in connection with this policy which have been subjected to repeated attacks on me by name, featured in leading Soviet publications. I did not invent the idea of developing laser weapons as a means for destroying ballistic missiles. The first person to propose such a policy was Soviet Marshal V.D. Sokolovsky, who first announced this Soviet strategic doctrine in his book, Soviet Military Strategy, first published in 1962. The development of strategic ballistic missile defense using laser weapons has been continuous Soviet policy since 1962. And the Soviets are expected to deploy such strategic defenses by about 1987 or 1988. Whenever a Soviet official says that such weapons are not feasible, that Soviet official is lying. Whenever Walter Mondale or some scientist in the United States says such weapons are not feasible, they, too, are lying.
He wants our country to spend hundreds of billions of dollars developing Star Wars schemes.
Now we're going to show you some excerpts from official Soviet training films. These films show you some of the details of operational Soviet plans for a sudden invasion of West Germany. As the films show, Moscow has never intended to conduct a so-called conventional attack against Western Europe. The films of which these excerpts are taken prove that any Soviet attack against Western Europe will be centered around the firing of nuclear missiles against troop forces and population centers of West Germany. Soviet military exercises in the Baltic and Eastern Europe have concentrated on cutting down the time needed to prepare a surprise attack from a few days to a few hours. Right now, as these films show, Moscow has the greatest concentration of combined nuclear, tank, infantry, air, and naval forces in history, aimed to be unleashed in full force against West Germany within a matter of hours. Here, you see a part of a Soviet live rehearsal for invasion of the northeastern corner of West Germany, Schleswig-Holstein. Against such an assault, NATO forces in Europe are vastly outnumbered and almost helpless, unless NATO forces respond instantly with nuclear counterweapons. There is only one weapon in our arsenal which could stop the ground and naval components of the kind of assault shown in these official Soviet films. That is the weapon I would order deployed if I were president. And I would let the Soviets know such a weapon was deployed for instant use at first show of Soviet assault. And that weapon is the so-called neutron bomb. This is an artillery shell which can be fired from a mobile howitzer. Less than 1,000 such neutron bombs deployed in the European front lines would be sufficient to stop a Soviet naval and ground assault cold. The great mass of Soviet tanks you see on the screen would be helpless once caught out in the open by neutron bomb bombardment. Therefore, since the Soviets know I would use such a weapon in such a case if I were president, or if the president were known to be listening to me, the Soviet command would drop any plans for launching an attack of the kind seen in this official Soviet film. Let us look briefly at another important element in these official Soviet films. We hear from the Neville Chamberlains of the nuclear freeze movement, such as Walter Mondale, that the Soviets are a peace-loving people who would be peaceful as lambs if we in the United States would only stop building up our military. In fact, if we take the actual rate of inflation into account, the United States is spending 5% less for defense under President Reagan than under the previous Carter-Mondale administration. When did you last see a military exercise of the United States to compare with these Soviet maneuvers? When did you last see mobs of U.S. citizens turning out to cheer our military forces to battle, as you see in this official Soviet film? Every day, in the official films, in the leading newspapers, and the major speeches of Soviet officials to peoples of Russia and Eastern Europe, the Soviet dictatorship is pounding the drums of war. They are mobilizing both their military arms and their people for what Soviet officials state openly is a war they intend to launch against us during the years just ahead. Peace between the United States and Moscow is possible only if the United States is strong enough to cause the Soviet dictatorship to desire peace. According to the recent public statement by George Bundy, the public address which President John F. Kennedy was going to make later during the day he was assassinated, would have said exactly what I say to you tonight. I know very well from my own personal experience that Moscow will maintain peace for only so long as Moscow believes that the United States might survive and win a general war. We must have peace, but we must have the strength to discourage any adversary from daring to attack us or our allies. Since the assassination of President John Kennedy until President Reagan's televised address of March 23, 1983, the military policy of the United States was based upon an insane doctrine, a doctrine known by the appropriate name of MAD, mutual and assured thermonuclear destruction. This doctrine was worked out between the Soviet Khrushchev government and the liberal establishment backers of Henry A. Kissinger during the last half of the 1950s. Through the influence of such persons as Averell Harriman, McGeorge Bundy, and Robert McNamara, this agreement with the Soviet regime was imposed upon the government of the United States. When President Kennedy appeared to be moving to reject the doctrine of nuclear deterrence, he died very suddenly. And Bundy, McNamara, and other backers of this agreement with the Soviets had a clear field in reshaping U.S. military policy. The essence of the agreement reached with Khrushchev was that both powers agreed not to develop efficient methods of defense against thermonuclear weapons. Both powers agreed to keep themselves helpless against thermonuclear weapons. Those who argued for such a state of mutual defenselessness against Holocaust insisted that this was the only way to prevent World War III. Already, under President Kennedy, the United States had effective means for destroying many Soviet missiles before they might strike our cities. What we had 22 years ago was exactly what General Daniel Graham proposes as his high frontier Rube Goldberg today. The only problem with Graham's proposal is that it is 20 years obsolete and would be a bad joke if faced with the new kinds of Soviet capabilities existing 20 years after it was designed. The Soviets were the first to recognize early the obsolescence of General Graham's line of thinking. Back in 1962, Sokolovsky wrote,
"Given the increasing assurance of destruction of a state which is vulnerable to full-scale thermonuclear barrage, it is more or less impossible for a state to survive such a war, or to win it, without deployment of means adequate to assuredly destroy a critical percentile of the total numbers of missiles launched against it."
Sokolovsky was right. He proposed that the Soviet Union must prepare to survive and win a general thermonuclear war against the United States. The center of his war plan was the development of anti-missile weapons based on advanced physics principles. He identified the development of laser weapons as a leading example of the new kinds of anti-missile weapons which were needed to develop the potential for Soviet military victory. His policies have been the center of Soviet strategic doctrine from then to the present date. If we delay the development of such defensive systems much longer, the Soviets will have such systems and we not. Then, they would be sufficiently invulnerable to be able to rule the world almost without firing a shot. Despite the fact that Sokolovsky's doctrine was well known in the West, the accomplices of Robert McNamara and Henry Kissinger have worked consistently over 20 years to force the United States and Europe to enter into agreements which Kissinger knew the Soviet government to be violating massively. The Soviets have always viewed diplomacy as the art of lying, and have always regarded treaty agreements with their adversaries as treaties they intended to violate massively. Whoever doubts this knows nothing of the Soviet mind. They see the United States as their main enemy, and they are determined to conquer us by any trick necessary. Right now, the Soviets are circling and harassing the United States and its allies like a hungry lion stalking an exhausted bull. They smell our increasing weakness, They smell our decline in military power. They smell our weakness of will, a weakness which we reveal by tolerating such Neville Chamberlains as a Walter Mondale, an Averell Harriman, and a Tip O'Neill. The Soviets sense that we have no longer the material strength or the moral will to defend ourselves. They are circling for the kill, and the bloodlust of anticipated early victory steaming in their eyes and nostrils. If we take 3 courses of action, there is still time to save the United States from Soviet domination. First, we must abandon the insane doctrine of nuclear deterrence, just as President Reagan proposed on March 23rd last year. Second, we must develop rapidly a first generation of strategic ballistic missile defense capable of destroying not less than 40% of all of the Soviet missiles which might be launched against the United States or our allies. And we must continue to develop and deploy improved systems which will destroy over 95% of all such missiles. Thirdly, we must change our monetary and economic policies toward both our allies and toward developing nations generally. We must promote rapid technological progress in agriculture and basic industry among all those nations which are either our military allies or merely friendly republics. We must build a wall of steel, a great wall of powerful economic progress around the Soviet Union. If we take these 3 sets of measures, we still have time to survive. We must rebuild our economy today, as President Roosevelt rebuilt our economy during the period 1939 to 1943. If we do not take such measures, the United States will not survive much past the present decade, at best. Technically, we are as close to deploying beam weapon anti-missile defenses today as we were to building the atomic bomb at the beginning of the Manhattan Project during World War II. The best scientists in the world who are familiar with these technologies agree. How soon we develop such weapons is simply a matter of how much effort we put into doing the job. If we proceed on a business-as-usual basis, it would take 10 to 20 years. If we proceed as we did during World War II, or in launching the Apollo moonshot, we can deploy a first-generation system in approximately 5 years, and a more advanced defense within about 10 years. The kinds of weapon systems we must develop can be divided into 3 general classes. The first class is beam weapons. The second class is special effects weapons using advanced physical principles, such as microwave bombs. The third class is new technologies in anti-submarine warfare. In actual warfare, the probable first action by Soviet military forces would be the launching of missiles from Soviet submarines off our coast, with an approximately simultaneous launching of Soviet land-based missiles against Western Europe and the United States. Unless the Soviet submarine-launched missiles were destroyed, or the submarines destroyed before the missiles could be launched, virtually no U.S. missile or strategic bomber based in the U.S. would get off the ground successfully. The purpose of Soviet submarine-launched missiles would be to create what is called a pin-down effect. The exploding of Soviet missiles, warheads, high in the atmosphere above the United States would generate what is called an electromagnetic pulse. This pulse would disrupt all major communications and power lines immediately within an area of thousands of square miles. In other words, any U.S. missiles which had not been launched already would not get off before being struck by incoming Soviet silo-buster warheads launched from Soviet territory. The submarine-launched missiles would explode over the United States within about 7 minutes, and the main attack from Soviet territory would hit the United States within about 25 minutes after the start of the attack. This is what we must stop through ballistic missile defense. The method we must use is called layered strategic ballistic missile defense. The first line of defense is beam weapons, which are assigned to destroy Soviet missiles at the moment those missiles are launched. The second line of defense is beam weapons assigned to destroy Soviet missiles in those missiles' highly vulnerable boost phase. The third line of defense is beam weapons assigned to hit repeatedly at all Soviet missiles and deployed warheads in the stratosphere. The fourth line of defense includes special effects bombs, which detonate above the level of our atmosphere, which will cause incoming warheads to tumble and therefore to burn up as they enter the atmosphere. The fifth line of defense is ground-based beam weapon systems assigned to destroy warheads as they descend through the atmosphere. The final line of defense includes throwing everything, including the kitchen sink if need be, to destroy a warhead before it reaches its target. A good ballistic missile defense system would destroy about half the Soviet missiles or warheads entering the area of defense assigned to each of the 6 layers of defense. In other words, over 96% of all Soviet warheads deployed would be destroyed before the final stage of defense. If only a 25% kill ratio were possible, then about 76% of all Soviet warheads would be destroyed before the final phase of defense. Obviously, a 50% missile kill ratio is our objective, but even a 25% kill ratio would be sufficient for the United States to survive such a war as a nation and to win that war. If the Soviets knew that we had a 25% kill ratio, that would be sufficient to deter them from launching the attack in the first place. Anti-missile beam weapons fall into 2 general classes. In the first class, a laser beam burns a hole in the missile or warhead. In the second class, the beam striking the missile creates a shock effect, so that the metal or ceramic of the missile seems to explode. In the second class, a beam carrying a punch of a few thousand kilowatts in a pulse of less than 1/1000th of a second can destroy any missile or warhead which the Soviets might shoot up. If we equip these beams with efficient detection and aiming systems, these beams can be fired accurately at a missile from more than 1,000 miles away. These are the most powerful weapons ever developed. Lasers fire at the speed of light, and in the best case, a pulse of less than 1/1000th of a second can destroy any missile the Soviets could deploy. Additionally, we're speaking about what we can do now, within less than 5 years, under a crash program of development. We have to reach all the technologies we require. The New York Times insists that such weapons cannot be developed. The New York Times has an interesting record as an authority in such matters. On January 6, 1880, the New York Times said the electric light would never compete with the gas flame. The Times wrote,
"We shall hear very little more of Edison or his electric lamp. Every claim he makes has been tested and proven impracticable."
The New York Times' scientific wisdom was also demonstrated in the same way in an editorial published on December 10th, 1903. This time, the Times ridiculed the airplane.
"We hope that Professor Langley will not put his substantial greatness as a scientist in further peril by continuing to waste his time in further airship experiments."
Later, the same New York Times ridiculed Professor Robert Goddard's work on rockets.
"Professor Goddard does not know the relation between the action and the reaction. He seems to lack the knowledge ladled out daily in our high schools."
The Eagle has landed. Roger, tranquility.
We have reviewed each of the arguments against the feasibility of beam weapons made by publications such as the New York Times. Every leading scientist assures us that all these so-called objections are as absurd as the Times warnings that the electric light, airplanes, and space rockets would never work. It is perhaps not a coincidence that these so-called technical objections come either from Soviet General Basov, who was building such systems for the Soviet Union quite successfully, or from scientists who are politically allied with Moscow through the nuclear freeze movement. Apart from those objectors who assure us that the peace-loving intentions of the Soviet dictators, the objections of General Graham are equally absurd. Not only would General Graham's proposed high frontier cost approximately as much as the development of the kind of strategic defense we support, Graham's high frontier is an obsolete system which would not work against Soviet anti-satellite weapons of the type now about to be deployed in space. This brings us to the price tag. The best estimate for the cost of the deployment of a first-generation system of strategic ballistic missile defense is between $200 and $250 billion over a period of approximately 5 years, an average of about $50 billion a year. This means approximately $10 billion the first year, increasing to above $50 billion as we reach the 5th year. The argument for cutting defense today is that with the present levels of federal budget deficits, we cannot afford an adequate defense. As I said to you in my TV network broadcast of October 23rd, if Congress had argued that way during the last war, you'd all be singing Heil Hitler today. The policy for national defense budgets ought to be that we spend as much as we must to keep our nation, our people, and our allies from being destroyed. We can and we must reopen 3 million jobs for operatives in manufacturing, mining, construction, transportation, and energy production. That would mean more than 5 million total jobs in industrial firms. If we can bring this up to a total about 8 million added jobs in total, the entire federal budget deficit will disappear. About $250 billion invested in strategic ballistic missile defense over the coming 4 to 5 years will be a great stimulant for new investments and new workplaces in all categories of basic industry, providing new employment for operatives in steel, in the automobile industries, in mining, in energy production, and in all categories of high technology industries. Just as NASA's new technologies spilled over into civilian industries to give us the greatest rates of growth of productivity during the post-war period, so the spillover of beam weapon technologies into civilian production will mean that the average operative produces much more than today, and that average operative employed has an improved standard of living. If we get back to the way we used to run our economy during the 2 decades after President Roosevelt's wartime economic recovery, we will begin to be able to afford an adequate defense and also many of the other things, such as good schools, which we have foolishly made ourselves too poor to afford during recent years.
I'm Tom Brokaw at NBC News Election Headquarters. Who will be the next president of the United States?
I'm Roger Mudd. Will the Republicans hold the Senate? What will be the outcome in the House?
I'm John Chancellor. What will the election results mean to you, your family, and your future?
If you want election coverage that goes beyond the vote count, turn to NBC News.
Coming up next on the scene at 10, the election countdown is on. Drunk driving cases in Metro are divided up among criminal court judges. And we'll begin a series on the alternative magnet schools and whether the concept is working for students in Metro schools.
These stories and more news coming up next on the scene at 10.
I cannot represent you as well as I want to unless I know your opinions, unless I know your ideas, unless I can get your suggestions and take them back to Washington and put them to work.
Albert Gore Jr. face-to-face with the people of Tennessee in one of over 1,200 open meetings he's held as a congressman. As senator, Gore will continue open meetings because he knows our government belongs to the people. Albert Gore Jr. for the U.S. Senate.
It's your Circle Buick dealer's drive to save lives. Buy an 85 Buick and get a no-charge $10,000 life insurance policy just for buckling up. And your choice of a free child safety seat or a free auto safety kit. See Richard Smith in Murfreesboro, Kane in Franklin, Parks in Columbia, Faulkner in Dixon, Wyatt Johnson, Clarksville, Barber in Springfield, Baker in Gallatin, and Wilson County in Lebanon.
We're your Circle Buick dealers. We've got Nashville surrounded.
The above-average students, sometimes they find their schoolwork no longer challenging. But now there are alternatives for the advanced student.